Okay, so I think we'll get started. Thank you everybody for joining, if you're joining live, or thanks for listening to the recording. So we'll start with some introductions and then we'll jump into the conversation. So I'm Helen Attia from Cadence. I look after some of our key relationships and public sector customers, which is why I'm hosting the webinar today. And I have two guests with me. So I'm delighted to introduce them to you. Let me get my screen moving. So James, why don't you go first? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's James Ballard. Actually, since we started our whole journey here, my job title has changed. So I am no longer the Deputy Academic Registrar. That's my fault for not updating my LinkedIn profile as well. My job title is now Director of the Student Hub. So I have a more focused responsibility for some of the frontline student services that are provided at Imperial College London. But I also have responsibility for the operational management of the wider registry team as well. So my involvement, especially with regards to our working environment and the safety of it, and also the facilities, is still under my remit. So I haven't managed to drop that piece off. So this webinar is actually quite prevalent for the work that I'm doing.
Thank you, James. Thanks for being with us. Alex?
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name's Alex Holly. I am the Head of People and Assets at the West of England Combined Authority. I'm looking very summery in that picture. I wish it was quite so sunny now. So my background is HR. So I was previously head of HR, and then took on a few other bits and bobs for the Combined Authority, which is the assets part of my role, which includes things like health and safety and facilities management, among other things, and ICT. So actually the whole sort of hybrid approach with staff, a lot of that actually fell within my remit at the Combined Authority. So hopefully I'll be able to share a few thoughts along the way.
Yeah, brilliant. Great. Thank you too for joining us. So so the plan is for us to have a 30-minute conversation, really get into the subject of hybrid working and how it's going, how you got things going within your organizations. And then we'll take questions at the end. So for everybody, please do send us your Q&A as we go through, and we'll pick up those questions at the end. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing so that you can all see our faces as we're getting into the conversation. Or should I say James and Alex's faces? So first one to kick us off, and maybe if we start with Alex, could you just share for us what hybrid working means to you and to the West of England CA?
Do my best, yeah. So I think for us, hybrid working. I mean, it's quite a new concept, I think, for a lot of organisations. Some super progressive places, I think, have probably been doing it for some time. But for, I think, the bulk of organisations that I speak to, is something that has come about as a result of the rethink following COVID. And I think for us, it's not just about where you work, it's about how you work as well. So it's about the culture and the culture that we want to create within the organisation, taking some of the learning that we've had through throughout the pandemic and continue to have as the pandemic rolls on, and applying that to our whole way of working. So blending home and office working, absolutely, that's the sort of most almost obvious element of hybrid working. But it's also going into how you communicate with staff, how you manage people who you might not be able to see all of the time, compared to when you used to be able to see them at least four or 5 days a week. It's helping people move away from a sort of rigid or potentially more rigid working structure of perhaps a 9 to 5 towards something that is a little bit more flexible, that both works for them, but also can work for the business as well. So I think yeah, in a nutshell, that's what our hybrid approach has been about.
Great, thank you. James?
I'm glad Alex had to go first on that. Yeah, I think pre-pandemic, the college has a flexible working policy, which we had enabled. We had staff using it, but and we had been looking at how we provide a different way of working, especially in the professional services within registry. One of the drivers for that is we had actually more staff on the books and we had physical desk space. So we were initially driven by our space, but there's been a gradual move, I say sort of 2018 onwards, about how do we change that culture at the institution, which is something Alex talked about. There has been, especially in higher education, a very traditional approach of 9 to 5, office-based delivery of work. And part of it was always about that. And we'd been working on trying to change that mentality, and the fact that people felt that they owned their desk space. And it had all their stuff. We hadn't helped in that arrangements by reissuing IT equipment that was PC based, which meant it had to sit on the desk, that it was named to the individual. So it was looking about how can we utilize that space, especially when you walked in the middle of the day. And I would argue about 40% of the desks weren't being used because all the staff were sitting in the meeting room around the corner. So it was, hang on a minute, something's not quite right here. And then really the pandemic happened, which the only one positive I can see from it was actually is accelerated some of our thinking and some of our approach to a more flexible or hybrid working from there. Because one midday everyone was in the office, the next day they weren't, and literally empty coffee cups were still on the desk. And a lot of heaters under desks were still on, which caused a few fire alarms in that first week or so. And then it's, what does that look like going forward? And within registry, it sort of enabled us to force the agenda. So the first stage we've had was getting the technology right for the staff. So we went and redeployed as many of the staff that we had that didn't have laptops to enable them to work a bit more flexibly in that stage, which ended up being about 80 members of staff that we did that with. There was a slight time lag by overloading our supplier with IT requests, which I think happened and still people are experiencing with global shortage of IT equipment. And then what we were able to do is get everyone set up so they could access and work effectively remotely. And the college has then moved to, from that, move away to how can they bring staff back in. And we have a working group that is a cross-college representation that has been looking at, one, identifying some of the challenges and some of the problems, and then asking the questions of how do we maintain a safe environment? How can we enable temporary arrangements for flexible and hybrid working? How can we listen to the community's experience of going remote quickly? And then how can we safely bring them back? So probably about from March last year, we moved into the second phase of this program, which was the transition and learn, which enabled us to trial different models of hybrid working and getting staff back in. For example, our finance team took a 2-day shift working pattern to bring staff back in. Registry, because we have some frontline services and some back office operations, was overall a minimum of 1 day a month to enable some face-to-face meetings for the team to go along. But other teams were coming in either on a daily basis or once a week or twice a week, depending on their business needs. And it was the business needs that was driving that attendance. Obviously, December happened, bit of a problem because it's given us a step back. And now we're looking at what that looks like going forward, because we were in the process of stepping that up. The college themselves are looking at putting together a hybrid policy going forward, and what that looks like, whether that be people in the office 2 day a week, 3 day a week, or how that works depends on the category of areas of staff, because we do have quite a diverse background of staff and roles that are taking place here at Imperial.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that next, whether you had a policy as such, but sounds like that's something that you are pulling together based on these phases and the phased approach that you've taken.
Yeah, that's great. We have, as I said, we've got the flexible working policy, which I think is available. If not, I can make it available, which effectively was the framework that we're building from, which might be a case of going back to the drawing board, but actually some of the principles in that remain sound and in theory could be used going forward. But as for something across the institution, we're not there yet. I think we were expecting to see something in the next couple of months, but that might be delayed with obviously the Omicron variant and its impact that it's had across the UK.
Okay. And so, Alex, do you have a policy as such? Did you build something specific?
Yeah, we did, and we've actually only just released it about 2 weeks ago. So we had a plan for a phased sort of reopening and phased implementation of our hybrid approach, which we started off sort of back in the summer, and the idea was it would sort of progress through the winter. We would gradually open up more and gradually look at the case numbers, look at the situation with COVID, and gradually reduce restrictions in a safe way, with a view to implementing the full hybrid approach early this year. Now, of course, as James just said, it's we were set back a little bit with the Omicron variant and everyone working from home again. You know, we had sort of in October and November, actually, we were starting to see quite a few more people in the office. Our office. Our office can hold 120 people. We only have 250 staff as an organisation, so we are quite a small organisation, and we only had about 120 people in March 2020 when we went off. So obviously space constraints were obviously fed into our thinking around our hybrid approach. But yes, so I suppose the short answer to your question is yes, we do have a hybrid policy. It's more a set of guidance, but it covers quite a wide range of things. So, for instance, I talked a little bit earlier about it being a culture piece as well, and of course it is. You almost have to, when you're creating a set of guidance like that, you almost have to marry up the top down and the bottom up side of things to create your future approach. So, you know, for instance, our chief executive was clear that she wanted everyone in the office at least one day a week. And wanted to encourage more than that, but wanted to at least mandate one day a week, irrespective of your role. So that was something that we had to build in. And then, of course, from the bottom up, we've run throughout the pandemic a number of different surveys that have covered off ways of working and what people want to see when they come back to the office, which maybe we'll touch on a little bit later, but there was some really interesting feedback that came back from that. But again, when creating that approach, you almost had to marry up the sort of leadership, what kind of organization and culture do we want to create, and also perhaps challenge that a little bit as well with what staff are saying and what makes sense for you as an organization, and potentially meet somewhere that is satisfactory, if you like, and you're never going to get everyone 100% happy, but that is broadly satisfactory to all levels of your organization. So our hybrid policy, yes, it does cover things like, you know, the expectations, but it also gives, you know, a number of tips, for instance, on how we manage people remotely, how we start looking at things like managing people based on outcomes rather than presenteers, and you know, how we should be communicating with staff, how staff can request flexible working. I mean, similar to James, we had a flexible working policy, we still do. But again, pre-COVID, the flexible working policy was in itself a little more rigid. So people would sort of request that, you know, they would request things like, for instance, a 9-day fortnight, or might request reduced hours on a particular day and longer hours on that, you know, and it would go through a sort of process whereby someone's manager had to sign that off and say, yes, we can make that work. Whereas what we're trying to move towards with our hybrid approach is actually, in some senses, as long as you're meeting the needs of the service, we don't really mind when you do that work. I mean, if there are certain things that absolutely need to be done at certain times, but, you know, if you need to leave at 3 p.m. to pick up your kids or whatever it happens to be, you don't need to put a formal request in through your manager to do that. Our policy will enable that to be a bit more of an organic way, because we trust people to make up that time in other ways or at other times of the day. So I think that's the sort of shifting culture that I think, you know, a policy can only get you so far. There's right. So many other elements to enabling that. there's there's the comms, there's the buy-in from senior management, there's giving, there's giving staff a reason to want to buy into the policy and to want to, for instance, come back to the office. Is the office environment going to be the same as when we left it, or actually are we going to rethink, for the sake of argument, how we use that space? Are we going to create more, and this is what we certainly did, create more spaces for collaboration and project working rather than sit down at a desk type working? So so there were all of these considerations formed our policy. And I suppose the final thing on that piece is we don't consider it a finished piece of work either. We've barely tested it. We tested some of the principles before we launched it, but of course, because of where we are with COVID, we haven't really had time to properly embed it. So if you ask me how it's working, my honest answer right now would be I don't know, but we are absolutely open to feedback always from staff. We're open to tweaking it, and we're open to sort of building it in collaboration with people.
So it's an ongoing policy, it's an ongoing process.
It is. Yeah, sorry.
How are you getting that feedback then? So how's that feedback loop working within the organization? And maybe James, you can take that one after Alex.
So yeah, it's obviously been a real challenge. So we, as part of the working group that was operating across the college, they put out a hybrid working questionnaire it was closed in November. We had the results sort of published with all the details. So out of that, we had 1,449 staff respond to it, which sounds like a reasonable take up, but when it only represents 18% of the staff community at Imperial, it's not massive, but it was a good subsection to actually understand some of the challenges. And in those questions, we were looking at sort of what types of contract, what days would staff want to work, how regularly would they want to work, sort of impacts about experiences with what's happened over what's worked well, what hasn't, from being on campus, off campus, and then really asking some questions about the future. So it was interesting to see the breakdown and how that happened for there. So some just high level things. We had 59% of respondents were working on campus or said they were on 2 days a week or less. Of that breakdown, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday seemed to be the strongest days when staff were on site. However, there was quite a high proportion, sort of over 500 respondents who don't have set days, so it depended on those business needs when they were coming in from that side. And just scrolling down, I'm sure we'll talk about this. It was interesting seeing some of the positives about working from home and working on campus. About working from home was improving focus, reducing distractions and boosting concentration, about improving work-life balances. One that everyone's seen, which has been a positive negative, has been reducing commuting time and cost. And then I feel that there's a sense of control over safety with regards to COVID-19. So there's just a touching from there. But some of the negatives we've also seen, especially about working on campus, is when everyone's not on site, it sometimes feels irrelevant, especially if you're working and then having an online meeting with people at home. So it's justifying what that value is of being on site from that side. And we've also, one of the big things that we've identified is that sometimes that experience can be compromised by the lack of technology and equipment, both on site and off site. One of the things, we have a number of our software that we have to access does sit behind firewalls, which, while works for small numbers of staff working remotely, when you've got everyone, we've had some challenges in providing the access and probably the robustness of that access to some of the systems, which was not an issue when you were on site, and also the ability of people's broadband to hold up to things like that. So it was really interesting, some of the feedback that we've got, and also looking at some of the sort of feedback that we got regarding to what the college could do to support hybrid working in future. So some of the points that came out of that were a trustworthy hybrid meeting guide, which talks about tech to meeting management, how you can deliver that sort of level of work. Definitions of the impact of making hybrid working decisions permanent, because at the moment everything feels very temporary and we haven't finalised what that future state looks like. And that temporary arrangement has already been in place nearly 2 years. as well. So there's still a lot of level of uncertainty going on from there.
Yeah.
And then for us, especially being London based, it's about being able to support flexible commuter times. And that ties in with what Alex said about there's been definitely a move away from that attendeeism approach to working, and more about the deliveries and the output. You know, the college has been, for its professional services, has been working remotely for nearly 2 years, and we're still going, and we're seeing a very different change in the behaviour and the way that we're having to work. I must admit, our paper expenditure and printing has zeroed out because people have almost, in a way, been forced to work more digitally, which actually then demonstrates we can do it. So it creates a whole interesting discussion about what do we do with all that space that we've got with empty, well, I say very dusty filing cabinets in the institution. And then about how we use our spaces, because one of the things we have noticed in that transition and learn phase is our meeting spaces are not really set up to manage sort of conference technology, and having some staff online, having some staff in the office, and we haven't quite got that happy medium of making sure that works effectively. And also we haven't got enough meeting spaces to be able to deliver that as well. So there's a project that's just been kicked off at the college to look at how we identify what we need from that, and what does that mean from an estate's perspective and a cost perspective to take that forward in a more wider picture than just registry.
And that's just to come in on that point, James, as well. So we have literally just, well, I say just, in November, we installed some hybrid meeting technology into our, so we had exactly the same problem. We had people turning up to the office, but essentially they were all just sat there on Teams calls, because half of the people were not in the office. And what tended to happen is it just made sense for the calls to be on Teams, and so people came in, sat at their desk, and put their headphones on. So actually part of our approach to hybrid working was about investing in some technology that we installed in the meeting rooms. I think we went with a Logitech solution in the end, that actually enables people to sit in a meeting room, so let's say half a meeting's worth of people to be sat in that meeting room with a camera and a TV screen. The people at home can see the whole meeting room, so they feel that and see everyone in it, so they feel that they're in that meeting, and the people in the meeting can see the people at home on the screen. And it works. Well, the few times that we tried it before we all got sent home again, it seemed to work incredibly well. And now I'm sure that technology will be in incredible demand now, and I'm sure actually it's likely to improve, because I would imagine that sort of thing is going to form part of certainly the near future, if not the ongoing future. But we absolutely recognise that need, and also that was slightly driven by. We were going to find it quite hard to convince people that coming back to the office, even 1 day a week, was a good thing and a worthwhile thing to do, if they can quite reasonably turn around to us and say, well, I did, and I sat for 6 hours on Teams calls. I may as well have been at home. So actually, to be able to create something that enables us to bridge that gap a little bit was really, really useful.
This concept of kind of apathy of going into the office is something that we come across a lot. Just as you said, why should I go in if I'm just going to stick my headphones on like I would at home? So could you guys both maybe talk to any other ideas that you've had, or things that, I appreciate you haven't had much chance to try very much out, but that is a common pushback. We've got one customer who was spending just a lot of money getting free lunches and events when people came in, and trying to just sort of drive people in through spending, to be honest, on employee perks, and even that wasn't working all that well. So just thoughts around that, and how to encourage it where it makes sense, I suppose.
I think I mean, I'll share a quick thought on that. I think you almost kind of encapsulated it in the last sentence, Helen, which was encourage it where it makes sense. And I think that's the important thing. If you're trying to drive people back to the office for the sake of being in the office, or because management are saying that we want you in the office, that's going to drive a defensive behaviour or potentially an apathetic behaviour. Whereas actually, if you're giving people a reason to go in, so for instance, one of the key feedbacks that we had through our staff surveys was that actually any kind of collaborative work, project work, is actually really hard to do on a video call. You want to be sat around a table, you want to be talking to people, you want to be writing things up on a whiteboard, or however it happens to work in your organization. That's, despite there being digital equivalents, I suppose it just doesn't work in the same way. So for us, we started to create, and quite cheaply as well. We didn't invest an enormous amount of money, although we did manage to get a small budget to support us with this, creating some more collaborative spaces, project working areas, and actually encourage people to come in to work on key issues or projects rather than just come into the office. So actually what that did as well is actually created a slightly different buzz about the office, because it wasn't just a bunch of people sat at desks. There were actually people getting together in groups, and then as that started to develop, people sort of saw that and picked up some of that energy as well. So I think, people will always come in, I guess, if you do a big event with a nice free lunch, but then you can't keep on doing that. You've got to change the culture and give people a reason.
Yeah, I was going to say, from our side, there was an initial use of food as an enticement to get in. A lot of the stuff within the registry teams has been around the concept of business need, which I have mentioned before. So we've had a number of collaborative and shared activities. An example would be we have to physically print degree certificates on a monthly basis. So the team will come in as a team to do that. We've also been ongoing throughout the last 18 months, continuing to have contact with our students over their visas or biometric residence permits that we have to issue to them. So we've had teams coming in to do that. So there is a sense of purpose on that activity coming in. And then one of the things where we've been trying to get everyone in at least once a month, that has been driven around the concept of a face-to-face team meeting. So everyone's in, so there is that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning about coming in, that you're doing something that is worth that view of coming in. Again, I agree with Alex. As soon as you start saying the management wants you in, that whole relationship and buy-in goes out the window. That needs to be a motivation to make it work and to give that experience of staff coming in. We've also had that flexible approach where we have staff who want to come in. So we've made it safe for them to be able to come in. The biggest area around that is ensuring that we haven't got any staff in here on their own. There is a level of management to be able to support them, but they feel safe coming into the environment, and we're able to sort of monitor to make sure that that there is no situations where there's any staff in a lone working situation. But it does mean that we've had staff coming in, some staff coming in regularly. We've had teams in on a monthly basis. We've had some teams in a bit more regularly than that, such as doing the visa distribution, and we were able to manage and monitor that and make sure there's some cover. We're quite lucky because one of the teams that sits under me is our student hub. There are almost reception or front-facing services. They're in every day, so we always have some staff on site. So we've been able to build quite a good community and interaction with the staff who, I'd say pre-pandemic, might go walk past that member of staff every day, would not actually have that interaction. So it's building that part of, we all are part of a wider registry community, and actually being in has been, when staff have been in, it's been a good experience. But we also are aware that some staff who still are very reluctant for various reasons about not wanting to come in, and it's making sure we're able to have that ongoing open dialogue with them to understand what their concerns are, and where possible try to elude them. But at no stage at the moment are we forcing staff back in. As long as the work's being done is probably done nothing. I think that's the main thing, and everyone feels supported in how they're able to do that.
That's great. It's really great hearing you both talk like that, because I have to be honest, we don't hear that from all the organisations we talk to. So it's very just mature kind of adult relationship with your team, which you'd hope, but I have to say you don't see that across the board. So super helpful. I hope people are getting some great tips and just finding the conversation helpful. I did want to move on to securing budget, and I'm just interested in whether you had pushback, whether it was a challenge internally to start investing in hybrid. Alex, maybe do you want to start there with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some senses we were quite lucky because it wasn't an enormous challenge for me. So you know, I took a proposal to our senior management team. I mean, I sit on the management team anyway, which is helpful, but essentially the business case for us was that actually you're saving a lot of money in a number of other areas as well. I mean, you know, right down to things like what James mentioned, things like printing, electricity. You know, there's all sorts that during the pandemic we had saved, and I think it's also worth saying that some of this stuff doesn't cost a huge amount. You can do kind of little tweaks and tests and surveys and shift a few desks around, you know, at very, very minimal cost. And that's we started with some of that. So we started to do things that were quite low cost. So I think, you know, I mean, as I say, we're a small organisation. I secured a budget of I think it was £35,000, which, you know, I'd imagine in Imperial College wouldn't get you very far, but for our smaller organisation, it did. You know, that was enough to even buy in a little bit of project manager time as well, just to support us for a few months in developing our approach. As well as supporting some of the technology and supporting just some of the kind of FM costs of shifting things around. Perhaps, you know, we ended up, for instance, buying more monitors because we'd given a load of monitors to people that were working from home when they all went and worked from home. And because we're implementing a hybrid model where we're actually asking people to split their home and office time, we didn't feel it was fair to say, but we want our monitors back, please, so that people can come into the office. So we ended up, you know, we bought some more monitors and keyboards. We paid for things like sanitization and cleaning supplies to help with making it COVID safe, signage, etc. But yeah, I mean, in terms of securing the budget, thankfully for us, it wasn't enormously tricky. I think the important thing is to point out where you're saving money elsewhere, and what the and the sort of and also the opportunity costs. What might the cost to the organisation be if we don't do some of this stuff? So, for instance, you know, there's this becomes a little less tangible, but you think of things like you know, recruitment and retention. Actually, if you're offering a hybrid approach, that is, I think, what the workforce are going to be looking for in the future. So, actually, if we don't do some of this stuff, are we potentially going to be losing out in the long run on retaining good staff, or even attracting good people to our organisation? So there are a number of angles on which I think you can make a really strong business case. And also, you know, as I would reiterate, some of it doesn't need to cost the earth.
I'd reiterate, you probably, Kellen, got two bad examples, because I have control of the operational budget within Registry. So once I was sure that it was the right thing to do, we were investing in it. And we had some money set aside for our annual expenditure on equipment. We've been running a upgrade phase on our IT equipment anyway, and what we ended up doing was escalating it and absorbing the additional expenditure, because I think I spent about £80,000 on laptops and docking stations, but this was something we would progressively do over 3 years, but we just upfront loaded it. And that was on the grounds that we weren't necessarily spending that money elsewhere, and I was able to flip it around the budgets. Now, I appreciate that I'm in a much more privileged position than potentially some of the other people listening on this call, but I had to justify that to the academic registrar, and that was quite an easy thing on the basis of what Alex talked about time and effort and cost savings. We put a desk booking system in, which was done on the grounds of administrative time to manage, which were for the upfront cost was saved back within the first month of it going live. So, and we were able to demonstrate that sort of going forward. The one challenge that I have created is this massive equipment legacy issue that everything's probably going to need to be replaced at the same time, because normally would stagger it a lot more, but it was to get everyone working as effectively upfront as possible. That was the way that we did it. We also then asked staff to do workstation assessments in there where they were working remotely, and then if they required any additional equipment, like Alex said, with regards to monitors or keyboard setups, or if they had any setups that were agreed through occupational health with sort of mouse keyboards and workstations, we then got them to log that, and we were looking at how we're able to support that. So we have sent out monitors, we have issued staff with certain types of furniture depending on the requirements that they need in order so they can work effectively remotely from that side. And again, that has been based a little bit on, we would normally have a budget for that, and we have spent more than that budget, but on the basis of some of the other savings across the activity, I was able to hide, it sounds really bad, I was able to hide that in somebody else's budget, and I'm very privileged to be able to do that. However, there was enough of a business case that I would have felt comfortable going up and saying, if you want us to continue working in this way, or you want us to continue working, this is what it's going to cost, but these are the add-on benefits that we can have going forward from that side. So that piece has worked pretty well, but it's, again, I haven't had to challenge or ask for that. I've been able to see and justify and explain what we're doing, and I've been in a much more privileged position than potentially some other departments and areas in the college to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful though. The opportunity cost, for sure, is something that people can look at, and where there are other savings being made. I mean, budgets are tight in all sectors, but particularly the public sector. So yeah, no, this is helpful. Great. Okay, and maybe if we could take a moment to do a little bit of future gazing. Any thoughts? I mean, so difficult to predict with this thing, but what do we see happening over the next few months, hopefully, as we come out of Omicron, and our organizations move more fully into a hybrid rhythm? Alex, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll be as brief as I can. I think we will probably start to see some easing of restrictions over the next couple of months, in terms of from a sort of central government perspective. But who knows? And let's keep an eye on cases and so on. Assuming we do start to see that, from our perspective, we'll be looking at a phased approach of our hybrid model, as we had tried to do towards the back end of last year, which will mean gradually opening up the office, gradually increasing numbers, gradually and safely reducing restrictions on things like masks, social distancing, and so on. Hopefully, but again, with both eyes firmly on the COVID situation, and I think we will start to see more of that hybrid technology coming into play. We've also got the desk booking system coming in, so that actually we can start to manage our numbers in a much more kind of proactive and effective way. And my view, which is just informed by, I guess, what I'm reading and what a lot of other organizations are doing as well, is that hybrid working is likely to be the future, and I do think that it will feature quite heavily in sort of what our current and also prospective workforce are going to want. So I think it will feed in quite strongly into things like recruitment and retention, benefits, and I think it will then have to have an impact across across our whole sort of suite of policies and culture and approach. So I don't see this as being a sort of reactionary thing to COVID. I see it as being something that in some way, shape or form, and with some tweaks, we won't get it right first time, is going to stick around for a while.
So I think from our side, when we see the restrictions eased, we're still going to have to probably deal with a capacity restriction on the space that we've got. So we'll start wanting staff to come back in. It needs to be on sort of terms that work for all parties, but I can see us bringing teams back in a bit more regularly, but we'll have to stagger it from that side. And really engaging with the community to understand what that future looks like. Imperial, I think, are going to go to a hybrid working policy, and we're just trying to drill down into the nuts and bolts of what that can look like, and sort of the frequency that we would look for some staff to come back in. We have a number of teams. One of them, obviously, I mentioned the Student Hub, which have a on-site presence every day of the week. So there is some work that needs to be done to understand what that means from a contractual perspective, to ensure that we're being fair and equitable with our staff that are coming in and the staff that are having to come in, because that's one big thing very noticeably about potentially travel costs for some staff who are having to come in, whereas other staff who are coming in less regularly are obviously having a saving from that point of view. Now, in the interim, where we've been bouncing from one to, we've sort of accepted it, but I think we need to come up with a much clearer approach to it going forward from that side. We need to look at, as a college, at our technology on how we can support both remote and mixed mode sort of activities, meetings and sessions, and that's something going forward from that side. It's the same longer term with our educational delivery. Part of our teaching and learning strategy is looking at our programs of study and how they're delivered, and I can only see across from both Imperial and the sector more mixed mode, more distance learning tied in with physical on site, being more broader across the programs that we have. And then last thing, it's actually driven us to probably look at our space on site, and look at how we use our space for professional and administrative services, and how we can free up more space for learning and teaching in student areas. So there are a number of projects that have kicked off that are looking at how we can do this across a number of teams, and try and consolidate our space, and can we find something that works where we can utilize it and free up, even make more meeting space or more study space for students on the campus. So there are lots of exciting things going forward. I think the only thing I'll touch on as well, in registry, we've noticed the value of that face-to-face interaction. So I think we'll be running more team activities and sort of training events, but also social events, so people can come in, because we've had staff start and finish without ever physically being on the South Kensington campus. And it's making sure that, some of the teams that we have, they've not ever met in person. They've only seen that much of someone. They don't know if they've got legs. So we need to be able to get that and actually start building that. Because I think going away from the campus has been really good in a way of actually starting to build more team community rather than sitting next to each other. It's just quite a strange concept to have. But I think we can take the positives that we've seen of that and try and embed it when we do have that face-to-face operations and people on site.
Yeah, love that. Great. Okay. Well, let's move to some questions from the audience. So, Deborah, you kicked us off with a question. How have you integrated your flexible working policy or flexi leave into the hybrid policy? I've got a feeling that came up when Alex, you were talking about your flexi working policy.
There we go. Sorry, I was on mute. Yes. So flexi leave has been one of our contentious points actually with the hybrid working policy, because as part of some of our historic terms and less terms and conditions, but more custom and practice that seem to have become terms and conditions, we had flexi leave in as much as people could actually note down their hours, build up hours and take off days. And as part of our hybrid working policy, we are removing that, which has been a challenge with the few areas that do still use that, and also with the unions. I could probably, I could probably talk for quite a while on this, but I won't, other than to say it's our view has been that actually we're taking a more adult approach to how we manage flexi. So we're not asking you to count up your hours. And what we are saying is that actually, if you have that good communication with your line manager and so on, actually they know that you've been putting in the extra time because the service demands it, then absolutely you can take that time back and you don't need to have it formally registered. But equally, what we also wanted to move away from was there was in certain pockets a culture of minute counting sometimes, and I think actually it's a really challenging one, because I think some staff actually feel quite reassured by the fact that they can justify that day that they're having off, or those few hours that they're taking, because they've got a, it's here, it's been signed off by their line manager, no one can challenge it. So I think we tried to couch it as a more sort of positive change that was actually based on trust and wasn't really taking anything away from people. In fact, gave them more flexibility to manage it without having to make those requests. However, I do equally understand some of the arguments that some people feel like it's a benefit that's been taken away. That said, we did agree that we would review it in 6 months, so we sort of sold it as a good thing. I think they were prepared to accept it, but only if we sort of reviewed it in 6 months to see how that was working. So I think it's a bit of a watch this space on that one, and it's, for me, sort of encapsulates the potential clash of culture between what might have existed previously versus what we want to create, and how we sort of move in a sustainable way from A to B without while keeping staff on board with us. Oh, and while, just very quickly to pick up your other question around working from home allowances, we've never given allowances for working from home, and we don't intend to do so. Our view is that people's base is still our office base. We are offering hybrid working as a benefit, but our office is available for people to work in. So we're not giving any working from home allowances, but we are pointing people towards the tax relief that they can get from the government on working from home. So that's our approach on that.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Okay, I'm going to jump down to Dagmara's question. So, and we touched on this a little bit, and we're talking about culture. James, you mentioned sort of social events and trying to get people together that way. So what about the social aspect of work? A lot of staff or new starters can feel isolated when working remotely. How do you encourage the interaction and staff relations? Do you recognise the importance of building and maintaining that human connection?
Yeah, for me, it's really important. I'm quite lucky because I'm aware of all our new starters within registry, but there's still members of staff I haven't met, which I would normally do by just walking up and down around the office. We've done a couple of things where we've had it sounds really minor, but we've had a relatively regular staff quiz that we do that everyone can drop in. It's in working hours as well, so it's not side out, because we tried to make a thing of it, saying we want people to come in, get involved, and have a little bit of communication by doing something, and engagement. So there's sort of friendly rivalry that's going on about how well they do within it, and that tends to get at least sort of 30% of the staff involved at any one time. So that's one thing we do. We have done some sort of online activities, sort of Christmas parties and get-togethers and stuff through Teams. We did something for Christmas last year where we sent everyone well, it was supposed to be cheese. We were going to have an online cheese tasting, but the company let me down, so it ended up being chocolate brownies. So it wasn't quite the same, but it was one of the things where we then had a big Teams meeting, because we use Microsoft 365 as our primary sort of underlying sort of key software, and everyone was they all got different sets of brownies, so we got everyone to talk about it from that side. Where teams have been starting to come back in, they've had team lunches to be able to go to, and we were looking at some registry activities as well. Depending on how organised you were, you got a Christmas party, or if you were very unlucky after the 3rd of December, that got cancelled. So we've got a number of things in the pipeline that we want to do, but it's quite a challenging thing because you need staff to want to sign into it without compulsory mandating them in a way. You must attend and you must have fun from this.
Organised fun.
Yeah, but it is very difficult through the technology. So it's finding ways of sort of things that are able to do. Within the teams that I work with, they're going to have the misfortune of actually me dropping into their meetings and almost doing a free Q&A where they can ask generally anything, and I'll do my best to be able to answer it. But it's trying to make those interactions. And I think one of the challenges, and definitely one of the bits of feedback that we've had, is while staff are communicating amongst themselves in their teams, they're not necessarily having the same exposure they would do across the other registry teams as they would do when they're physically on site. So we need to look at how we can improve on that going forward. But if anyone has any ideas on the attendees, please stick them in the chat. I'll quite happily trial them out for you.
Anything you'd add on that one, Alex?
Yeah, so I mean, not an enormous amount to add to what James. I think James has done more than we have, but we've done some similar things. So we try to encourage some socials, and we try to encourage people to get together. We've also tried to encourage, as I sort of said earlier, some more sort of collaborative working both within and across teams and providing the space and environment for that. So I mean, yeah, it's tricky, I think, and particularly I'm reading the question now and about how staff and new starters feeling isolated, and we have had a lot of that. We've also, alongside it, really revamped, I don't have time to go into it now, but really revamped our wellbeing strategy and approach to really put in place something that was much more appropriate for people who were working remotely, because it was obviously beforehand was very much based on it being an office-based environment, and we employed, well, we got some staff to become mental health first aiders for the sake of argument, and really kind of supporting with regular contact and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's one of the it's been one of the biggest challenges of particularly the lockdown periods. And I think last January, February, I think was probably the worst for us, for those particular staff, because not only were they isolated at home, but there wasn't really anything that they could go out and do either during that time. So yeah, but very aware of it, and we've tried to put in place things that will hopefully bring people together and give them that interaction.
Great. Good stuff. Well, I think we will wrap there. We've gone on a little bit longer than we'd intended, but I certainly found it a really, really valuable conversation. Thank you both again. And James, thank you for sharing the report that you stuck on the chat there. So the hybrid working report, if folks want to grab that, please do. And what is it you've just, do you want to share what you've put on there as well?
Yeah, we've got quite a detailed level of staff guidance, which people should be able to access some of it. They might not be able to access all of it because it might drill behind our firewall, but it'll give you an idea. We've got information on well-being, how we're supporting our staff who are how to work remotely and safely, but also part of our work around work and move from home are quite useful. So if you can access some of that information, it does give you some just good information, just a reference of what we're doing as a college with regards to supporting our staff and some of our hybrid working and location guidance that we have, which you can't access. So I'll see if I can dig it out, see if there's anything controversial in there, and maybe surface an edited version of that.
Excellent, and we can share that.
And similarly, Helen, I'm happy to dig out I don't think ours is publicly available. I can dig out our hybrid working policy. Again, I might just have to have a quick scout through just to make sure that there's no howlers in there. I don't think there are, but again, I'll share that with you, Helen, and you can circulate it to the attendees.
Thank you very much. All right, well, thank you again to both of you, and thanks for everybody that's joined us live, and for those that then listen to the recording. I think that's a wrap. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.